Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'll be talking about the new World of Warcraft leveling experience after a thorough leveling run in the beta and some more in pre-patch. First, a recap. How does the redesign work? Now, the level cap and proportionally all levels have been squished, from 120 max level in Battle for Azeroth to 60 Shadowlands. Live, since 50 to 60 is meant for Shadowlands zones, out the 23rd of November. Before, the level cap is for now 50. In Shadowlands, new players, or all players going through it on new alts, are thrust into the new leveling experience introduction, Exile's Reach, and at level 10 then led into the Battle for Azeroth zones, up to level 48, in which they're told to get back to the capital of their faction, regardless of their stage in question, to find out what happened to their faction leaders, starting Shadowlands proper. Older players can instead pick Exile's Reach or the race's own starting zone, and then an expansion to level 10 to 50 via Crowley time. The good. Exile's Reach is a quick, nice experience that actually teaches players the ropes of the game and of their class with a little story to follow. Further, the ability to pick whichever expansion helps players trying multiple alts and classes to keep things fresh, or maximize their way around the leveling. The squish in itself is a huge boon to make leveling feel better, less daunting, and each and every level feel more significant, with abilities unlocked almost at every level. New players thrust into the PFA zones get to see a story that is, if anything, cohesive and consistent, in zones that actually look up to modern standards. Leveling is also a lot faster, due to the more focused and concentrated distribution of quests. The bad. Exile's Reach characters are nice, but obviously they'll never appear again until I'd imagine well into the lifetime of the Shadowlands expansion at the earliest. Furthermore, for new players there's a massive problem of story. Fine to skip all the story up to BFA, if BFA gave a decent enough view of the world and the forces struggling there. Scourge, Legion, the Old Gods, Alliance versus Conflict. But BFA, on both sides of the faction divide, doesn't do that, telling stories bound mostly to the zones they're set in, with very nebulous and unexplained ties to the main story. I've just saved a bunch of crops from the Horde, and now you tell me to jump into hell because I am supposed to be the one hero to do so. Makes sense if you're the champion of Azeroth, the warrior of light of World of Warcraft, but otherwise it does feel very pulled out of unmentionables. The FA also fails to connect properly to Shadowlands. Even the war campaign and thus Sylvanas' flight, after the duel at Orgrimmar's Gates, is not only not available till level 35, but the player is also as well not really pushed to go through it. Of course, the same kinda issue happens for players on their second runs with other expansions. They never get to see the end of them, and the major characters of the story never get to shine enough to create that sort of emotional attachment that the story needs to have in order to achieve that kind of shared narrative Blizzard wants to emulate from Final Fantasy XV. They didn't use these specific words, but you can just check how they presented this new system at BlizzCon last year to see the comparison between the lines. On a technical level, there is also the problem that was actually visible before pre-patch. On live as well, if you leveled via heirlooms, that BFA zones not only are designed for players who have at least a decent idea on how to play the game, given how mobs populate questing areas, but also players decked in Azerite armor, traits that massively outlevel the gear you got from normal quests. Last, and I suppose least, given ESO and other immunes do it as well, the new system does away with any ability to go through the game's content chronologically. You can level the old way, dropping expansions. But not only it's extremely chaotic, double as much as it was before, but also way slower. As a result, most new players will see only the content and unlock it of one expansion, peacefully or cursedly, unaware of the massive swaths of unlockables from literally years worth of expansions contents. Given the amount of bad, wouldn't have it been better to just keep the leveling as it was, you may ask? And the answer is definitely not. WoW's overall leveling has been very bad since basically Wrath, with a story presentation that's been jumbled and bloated, made even worse by the developers refusing to force players to see the whole story before accessing to endgame. This is changing, partly, in Shadowlands, but it has consequences on the leveling process. Nobody is advocating for players to forcibly do every quest and zone before accessing endgame. While FF14 doesn't mind doing it, it in change offers paid ways to skip the process entirely, and it hasn't 16 years and counting worth of content to sift through. But if you push for one of the many expansion stories to be the main way to level characters, instead of having players gaming the game, switching leveling zones, hunting for the quickest way to level, then said story should be presented in its entirety. Yet, even a partial but cohesive view of the game's second to last expansion, which in itself gives a faster leveling experience since everything is most concentrated, is better than the completely jumbled, fragmented leveling we had before. And while for new players this might still be a confusing and far from a good story experience, for veteran players this is great, giving them the chance to both relive their favorite expansions and just mix and match as they prefer, which can be fun in and of itself. In conclusion, these changes feel made by veteran players for veteran players, and not as courageous as they could have been. A few steps forward, but at least a couple backwards. Overall, a huge improvement over the old system, but there are still a lot of issues that weren't tackled or thought through, in my opinion. This is all for today's video. Thanks for watching, remember to like, subscribe, and follow me on Twitch. I will start streaming coming next week. Stay safe.